Now let's use Google Earth to measure the crown width of some trees. I used this an awful lot in my PhD work when I was looking for old growth size territory of increment cores. So let's scroll right in here. And that's looking like a nice, discrete, individual tree. It looks like some kind of a spruce here. So we're going to use our ruler tool. And we need to measure a line. And we want that to be in feet. If it's not in feet, you use that drop-down menu. There it is. Click once to start, and twice to finish. That's a 21-foot wide crown. That's not a bad crown. So let's scroll around and see what else we have around here. There's a hardwood tree. That looks like it might be a couple of hardwood trees. Let's try to find one that's really nice and by itself. That one looks like it might fit the bill. Use the ruler tool, and we'll measure across that 30 feet. Here's another one, 24 feet. Of course, this is not nearly as precise as going and measuring it on the ground because this photo is in places at a bit of an oblique angle, meaning you're looking at the tree sort of from the side. So there's some interpretation that goes into this. But a stand with relatively large crowns, and that is going to have relatively large trees, of course, holding those crowns up. So you can use that as a bit of a search for finding larger and perhaps older trees, though the largest trees are often not the oldest ones, because once you're a big huge sail up in the wind here, that's a lot of stress on the tree. It's likely to be susceptible to injury and disease, because the injuries are sort of inroads to the disease. So the very oldest trees are often sort of flying under the radar of these larger ones. So these larger ones, they've been there for a while. But if you picture yourself being a logger back in the 1800s, you would probably be looking to harvest the big trees. And if you see a lot of big trees still remaining on the landscape, there's a pretty good bet that there's some old trees mixed in there with them. And maybe the big ones happen to be old themselves, but you can grow up to a good size pretty quick. But if you're a small crowned, sort of middling stature tree, you can often bump along for centuries. And that's where you find some of the oldest trees. And in a search for old growth, you're often looking for any evidence of old skid trails or roads, because that would tell you somebody has been there before. And old growth we're defining as a stand that has never been harvested. That's the definition that's commonly used. So as we move through this landscape, we see no roads, we see no trails, we see no evidence whatsoever of human activity. As we keep moving through this landscape, here we start to see trails. So those are harvest trails there. As we zoom in, we can see the ruts left here. That's not ideal, but it is what we have in this case. We can even go so far as to measure the track width of that machine. There's a well over a 7-foot wide track there. And that tells you, of course, that somebody's been there quite recently. But let's see if we can find some evidence of older activity. That all looks recent. That's a nice little swampy area there. Let's go to somewhere where I know there's been activity. So, excuse me while I scroll here. There's that, there's that, there's that. This watershed is where I do a lot of my work, and it was last harvested in the 1950s by a crew of Tibetan loggers working for Great Northern Paper. And these are modern roads. That's a modern road. But these are 1950s roads, and it's actually harder to walk along them than it is to walk through the adjacent forest, because this is all grown up densely to aspens and some balsam fir. And a lot of those are blown over, so it's just a real pain to get through there. But you can see the track of that old road from 70 years ago. And there's, again, on the other side of that stream, another track from 70 years ago, also 70 years old. So in this case, I know when it happened, and I know what the dates are, within that decade at least, and we can see what some of that history looks like. Let's scroll through here. So let's get my bearings, and there we are. So most of this stand, most of this entire watershed, was harvested in the 1950s, with the exception of just a few spots. And we can see this trail going up in here, and this runs through some very steep grounds. This is sort of a cut, a geological feature that cuts through from this stream over to this stream. And there's steep bedrock on either side, and a bit of a enriched soil here from all the organic material that's been washed down those hills. On this side, there's really just a lot of younger trees. So you can see if we measure the crowns here, we have some of these aspen here, a lighter color, looks like maple in the darker. Let's measure some of these crown widths. So that's 12 feet, that's, come here, 10 feet. See if we can find a bigger one here. This one up on the hill might have escaped any harvest, 24 feet. That's a bigger canopy up there. You can see, let's try that one. Click. Sometimes you have to click a few times. 18 feet, not bad. But you get over into this side, and this appears to have escaped the most recent harvest. There's a lot more bigger, older looking trees. So there's a spruce, let's measure that. 20 feet, that looks like it might be an aspen, lighter color, 23. And the way that I'm interpreting what's an aspen and what's a maple here is that there's differences in the phenology, meaning differences in when the leaves change color. So this being a fall color imagery, we can see a lot of these crowns have already lost their leaves, and that's not hugely uncommon. And then we have these other trees that are hanging on. So here we can see very clearly these trees are very much alive, but they've already dropped their leaves, so we can't see them. So this is not perfect fall color imagery. It's telling us some things, but it's not really what you might hope for if you are paying for fall color imagery. This is, of course, free. But let's try measuring that crown. 18 feet, not bad, not bad. Let's see what others we can see clearly here. You can see as I move around how steep that ground is. There's one, I'm going to interpret that as one canopy, 18 feet. So we can see over here, this is a larger crown, more mature forest. And this is actually classified as late successional, meaning there might have been a harvest prior to the 1950s one. So it might not be true old growth, but it's acting an awful lot like it. And that's classified as late successional by the landowner. They're not going to be operating in there. That's sort of a reserve patch, where this, really nothing special. It was last touched in the 1950s. There's nothing terribly unique about it. So this is going to be rolled into normal operational activity, where this side of what I call Thompson's Traverse, because I use it to get from this watershed over to that watershed without going over the whole hill, is going to be protected. And we can see a massive difference in the conifer here. So see the size of these crowns, a few bigger ones up here. But see how tiny these are compared to up here? This is a massive difference, and that's a reflection of age. This would have been harvested in the 1950s. This is much, much older. So let's just try to measure some of these canopies. So here's a bigger one here. Click. Click. 7-ish feet. Move up here. Click. Click. 14 feet. So twice as wide, meaning substantially more crown volume, wider spacing. These are substantially different forests here. So this, much less common, deserving of protection. This, plain vanilla spruce and fir.